Hi everybody, it's part 2 of the Cowpens mini-series on my revisit to Cowpens. Today is December 15th. I'm in Cowpens, South Carolina, and we're 1 month and 2 days away from the date of the actual battle, which is one of the reasons I got out here today, because this is the closest to the battle date I've ever been at Cowpens. So I thought, you know what, we want to get to the battlefield at the closest time to the battle that we can. And for me, this is it, because I won't be down here in January. So in terms of Cowpens and Daniel Morgan, his story plays into the Battle of Cowpens. And by the way, it's an absolutely gorgeous day out here. It's a little brisk, so beyond that, it's great. Daniel Morgan, well, first, let me start by saying I'm not a historian. I'm just a military history fan. Play military history war games, if you know my YouTube channel. That's what I do. That's what I like to do. So I'm not a historian, so I might have some historical inaccuracies in what I tell you. I'm trying to tell you the Battle of Cowpens to the best of my ability after reading just a couple books on the subject. So I'm just trying to tell you the story of this fantastic battle. Anyways, in regards to Daniel Morgan had fought in the French and Indian Wars. He'd been wounded. He'd been shot. And the shot had come out the front of his mouth, basically, and busted a bunch of his teeth. And poor Daniel, he also was whipped by the British for insubordination, and he was given a sentence of 400 or 500 lashes. 500 lashes is virtually a death sentence. But he survived it, and he always made a claim that the British only lashed him 499 times, and therefore he owed them a whipping. So for a guy that took 500 lashes, he's going to be, and he's been shot through the face. This is a tough guy, and this is a guy that knows the power of weapons. He's a veteran. He's fought in the French and Indian Wars, and now he's fighting at the Battle of Cowpens. In terms of Daniel Morgan's flying army, they call it here in at Cowpens. You've got Washington's dragoons here, obviously. So you've got these guys here. You've got over 100 of these guys, and then you've got the militia elements here. So you've got your standard militia type with a musket, and then you've got your militia type with a musket or a rifle. If they've got a rifle, then they're probably in the sharpshooters, and they're going to be in the front line. Here you've got the standard type Continental soldier from the Maryland Continentals, which were led by Howard. These guys will become critical in the Battle of Cowpens. Let's keep this thing rolling. So we're going to walk the battlefield, and hopefully I'll run into a map that'll kind of give us an idea of what the deployment of the forces was, and then I can fill in a few of the blanks, because I've walked the battlefield a few times. I know there's one up here, so I think it's just down here. This isn't a huge battlefield, and what's nice about it is you can walk it basically in just a few minutes, so we'll be able to walk the whole battlefield. Keep in mind, so you have about 2,000 Patriot and Rebel forces here, and you have about 1,000 British forces. The British forces are well trained. They are they're going to come at you with bayonets, man. They're well trained. They're aggressive, and their commander, Bannister Tarleton, he was a very aggressive commander. He was young. He was a lawyer. He was fighting in the British Army, and he had a reputation for being super aggressive, and he lived up to his reputation here at Cowpens. He really did. He came right at the rebel forces. I got a little marker here. Spirit of the people. Spirit up the people. Right in here, if you're looking here, this is really where the cavalry deployed, and hopefully I'll be able to come up to a sign where it shows the deployment of forces. But sorry, I changed the view of my camera. The Continentals, or the rebel forces, deployed. Daniel Morgan had the cavalry, Washington's cavalry, deploy in the very rear of the forces. So this was basically so they could react to anything that the British cavalry were doing. And these guys deployed back here in the rear where they could easily be directed by either William Washington or Morgan himself to wherever they needed him on the battlefield. And this tells you this is the spot where they were. The open forest provided proved well suited for cavalry action. And so you had the mounted militiamen, and they were posted. There's a swale right on the other side of this, and that's where they were holding out until they were needed in the battle. The Continental and militia forces were deployed in 3 lines. The first line consisted of sharpshooters. The second line consisted of over 1,000 militia, and the third line consisted of the Continental regulars from Maryland and New Hampshire. Or excuse me, they were from Delaware. I'm so sorry. So the third line, it composes of Continentals from Maryland and Delaware, and those guys were trained by von Steuben. So they knew drill, they knew how to use a bayonet, they knew how to deliver volley fire well, and so those guys were kind of the bread and butter of the Continental forces. And the reason we have 3 lines is Daniel Morgan set up a defense in depth here. And the defense in depth, and we're walking from the American line, or excuse me, the rebel patriot lines towards the British forces right now. The first line, the militia, the sharpshooters, is to, of course, decimate the ranks of the enemy, shoot the officers, and the second line is a nominal stop and fire a couple volleys, and the third line is going to be where the real grit happens. So we're coming up to the third line because I'm walking towards the British line, and this line here and is where you can see they've got a guy standing in line here pointing down the way, and you can stand in his footprints and get an idea what they were looking at when the British were coming. This is where the regulars were, and there's a monument over there, a very old monument to the soldiers that were here. So line 3, this is where you have about 300 Maryland and Delaware Continental regulars. These guys are the guys that are going to go toe-to-toe with the British, and they're way down here. They're at the very end of the line. This is not something that has been done in a Revolutionary War battlefield. Usually the forces line up in a big line, the British come at them, the militia fire a couple shots, then break, and then the regulars are left to fight the British head on head, and then they're outnumbered and they lose the field. That's how battles in the Revolution 1.0 work. This battlefield, Morgan decides he's going to try something different. This is really strategic thinking that hasn't been done before, or tactical thinking that hasn't been done before in a Revolutionary War battlefield. So Morgan is basically he's come up with this idea that he can do 3 lines, and he's going to chip away at the British. So by the time they get to this third line here, by the time they get right here, they're going to be ready for him, and they're going to have decimated their officer corps. They're going to have made them give chase to their forces, and they're going to and this deployment shows that Morgan, he understands Tarleton, man. He knows that Tarleton's going to come at him. He gets him. He knows his enemy. Tarleton's chasing him. And the other thing too is these guys got here the night before, so Morgan knows this ground. So does Tarleton. Tarleton's been out here before. So, and this road we're going on here, this is the road the British came down. So they're coming down this road, and they know they're coming down this road. So they just pick good ground and say, okay, we'll wait overnight for them. They're going to get here in the morning, and the British show up at about 7 a.m. and this thing's over in less than an hour. But the night before, they get to camp out over here overnight. Morgan goes around the campfires and tells the militia guys, he says, I just need 2 shots. Give me 2 shots at them. And then I want you to withdraw to the left and then redeploy with our regulars. When I mean withdraw to the left, they would go to the left of the Continental troops, the regulars, so that there was some sort of cohesion to how they withdrew. And so that's all Daniel Morgan asked of his militia. So we're coming up to Pickens' militia line here, and Andrew Pickens' guys would be here, and we're talking about 1,000 guys here. And they were gonna hit the British. This is the second group that's gonna hit the British after the sharpshooters. And so this here's the monument for, or the marker for the second line. And along this line here is going to be 1,000, roughly 1,000, maybe 1,200, 1,300 militia lined up, and they're going to give them 2 volleys. And they want them to get within killing distance and give them 2 volleys. And I love this quote here at the lower right hand. It says, "At first it was pop, 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 and then the whole volley. It seemed like one sheet of flame from right to left." That means the militia got off a great volley. And while we're here, I'll just show you this, and we'll go over this disposition here. This is how the forces were disposed. So earlier we walked by where the cavalry was deployed. This is William Washington's cavalry and the militia cavalry. This is the line of the Maryland and Delaware regulars led by Howard. And then here, where we are right now, this is the militia line. This actually should be longer because there was about 1,300 guys here, I believe. And, you know, somewhere between 800 and 1,300 here probably. And then here is going to be where we have the sharpshooters. So we have this steady line of militia, line of last line kind of defense. And then up here, this is Sharpshooterville. We're going to see that in a minute. The British deployment, to be a little more specific, their infantry is going to push forward. They have 50, the 50 dragoons they are going to charge forward into these, towards these sharpshooters here. And the sharpshooters are going to empty about 15 saddles. And that's when Tarleton realizes this is serious business. And because he thinks this is a screen to allow these guys to retreat. He doesn't realize that this is first line of a defense in depth. So he wants to brush off this screen and get at the main body, which he believes is likely withdrawing. So he deploys the grasshoppers here. His main infantry force is here. This group of troops here, this is his trump card. This is the 71st Highlanders, Fraser's Highlanders. And these are your guys these are your elite. This is your elite punching power here. And then back here, this is the Tarleton's Legion Cavalry. So you've got the Legion infantry here, the rest of the infantry, 71st Highlanders, and Tarleton's cavalry. These guys end up not even getting engaged in the battle because by the time Tarleton wants them to deploy them, they know the jig's up and they withdraw. And they end up being the first guys to show up at Cornwallis's camp. So how the battle breaks down is this line comes forward. At first, the cavalry comes forward to engage the sharpshooters. They get thrown back. The infantry drives forward. These guys fire shots, and they're aiming, and Morgan has told them, shoot at the guys with the epaulets. And they decimate the officer ranks of these elite British troops. And that becomes critical later in the battle. So what happens is these guys decimate the officer corps. The British come forward. They push them back. These guys pull back. Then they hit the second line. They fire 2 volleys. These guys, to the best of their ability, go to the left and try to reform behind the third line. By the time the British hit the third line, they start to charge. When they charge, these guys, they bring up the Highlanders to flank this third line. Howard sees the flanking maneuver by the Highlanders, and he wants to refuse the right flank, which means act this flank like a hinge, right? He tries to refuse it. The Highlanders come in, but what happens is the order gets misunderstood, and his troops about face and start marching to the rear. The other Continentals, seeing this, all in turn start marching to the rear. And that's when Morgan comes up and he says to Howard, "What are you doing? What's going on?" And Howard basically says, "I'm just redeploying." And at that moment, these guys turn around and these British are charging at them, and they just simply about face and give a volley into the face of the British. And that is the end of the battle. because everything falls apart after that for the British. This redeployment and withdrawing to the rear gives the British the thought that they're withdrawing from the field. They smell blood, they come at them, and what they don't realize is that whole force is going to turn around and they're going to blast them at point blank range. The next thing that happens is Washington's cavalry comes hitting over here on this flank, and the next thing that happens after that is militia infantry comes hitting over on this flank, and it becomes a double envelopment, and it's over. It's over very quickly after that point. So there you have it. That's the battle in a nutshell. So we're at the second line, and we're now going to work our way up to the Sharpshooter Line. Kind of like a chess match that goes badly for Tarleton. And Morgan has basically anticipated Tarleton's moves. And up here at the Sharpshooter Line, you can get a real sense of the battle here, because this is line number one. These are the guys that are going to be sitting behind these trees up here, and they're going to be plinking away at the British as they deploy into line. And they've probably got rifled muskets. They're probably slower to load, and they're a lot more accurate. And these are guys that can hit an officer at a good distance. These guys are guys that probably hunt and fish and are outdoorsmen for their livelihood. The other thing you'll notice is we can walk this battlefield, and as I'm walking, look how close these lines are, and get a sense. It's hard to probably get a sense over the phone, but they're perfectly spaced. I mean, Morgan probably paced this off himself. They're perfectly paced so that the guys can withdraw, and then by the time the guys withdraw and the enemy comes within range, everything's reset up and they're ready to fire another. The next line's ready to engage. This is the skirmisher line here. And along here, this is where the sharpshooters, and there's one right there, all were in these, they're all deployed here loosely, and they're plinking away at the British. And, for me, when I'm here on the battlefield, I can look down the line here and see that road and know the British were coming up that road. And I can see it in my mind's eye and hear them coming up that road. And, if they're, who knows what they're doing, whether they're playing some sort of instrument or marching and doing cadence, whatever they're doing, or simply just marching. But I can see it in my mind's eye, those guys coming up that road, and these sharpshooters waiting for them right here. It's an amazing sense you get on this battlefield. They're coming up that road, and where that bench is, if you can see it down there, that's where they're going to come in. They're going to start getting shot at, and they're going to start deploying into line back there. And they're going to deploy into line to frontally attack these militia and launch their cavalry into them. So let's go take a look at the British perspective of the battle. The British are coming in to deploy in line here, and they're going to assault the first line of militia that are sharpshooters, and then assault the second line. And by the time they get to the third line, they're going to be pretty tired. These guys have been marching for 44 out of the last 48 hours, or at least awake for those hours. And they haven't had any food because they're trying to catch up to Morgan. Cornwallis in the correspondence doesn't think that they're going to catch up to Morgan. He expects to catch Morgan between a vise somewhere around Kings Mountain. It doesn't work. Tarleton and his guys get caught or catch Morgan here, and Tarleton, being who he is, does what he does, and he's going to assault the Continentals, and that's how that breaks down. And let's take a look at the battle from the British perspective here. And so Tarleton comes down, and his men deploy, and they are going to assault into the militia. So his front line's going to deploy here. His crickets are going to deploy along, grasshoppers are going to deploy along the road, and he's going to push. And then at the end of the battle, he comes back to get his cavalry to engage, and they won't, because the jig is up, the battle's over. They flee the field. According to stories, William Washington catches up to Tarleton, and Tarleton shoots at him, or Tarleton or an officer shoots at him, hits his horse, and Washington hits whoever he's fighting in the hand, and I think another British soldier tries to kill Washington, and Washington's servant, according to legend, shoots that officer. And meanwhile, with the Continental troops, they make a race for the grasshoppers to see who can capture it. And a guy leaps on his pontoon, and when he leaps on his pontoon, and he uses it as a pole vault to jump onto the cannon and claim it for the Maryland Continentals. And it's a captain in the Maryland Continentals that claims the grasshopper, the honor of the grasshopper, for his unit. And there you have it. That is the Battle of Cowpens. I hope you get an opportunity to come out here to Cowpens National Battlefield and check out the battlefield. It's a really beautiful battlefield, and like I said, the staff is wonderful. And so this is part 2 of the Cowpens series. Thanks for watching. See you next time on the battlefield.